So how does Jason Jakes, the parliamentary budget officer's assessment, weigh on the Carney government as it hopes to pass its first budget through Parliament on Monday? Let's ask that question to the front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now a senior advisor at North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is the former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. And former interim NDP National Director Carl Belanger is with us here. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. Thank you. Welcome to you all on this Friday. Now, Sabrina, it may not have a direct impact on Monday's confidence motion on the budget, but how do you think that this PBO report affects the Prime Minister's standing as a fiscal manager?
I mean, I think there's always, or historically over the last several years, there has been a tension between the PBO and between Parliament. And I think when perhaps Justin Trudeau was leading the country, perhaps you might be more inclined to believe the PBO's assessment, or be more inclined to see from the PBO's perspective where they are leaning towards. But I think with Mark Carney's leadership,
is it because he said he didn't think much about monetary policy?
Understanding.
Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Mark Carney
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Canadians don't necessarily believe that. And I think what the other problem is like, you know, we have seen Pierre Poilievre come out and criticize that. We saw that clip that you just played, but Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives haven't put forward a better fiscal plan. And there's very little that they're actually arguing with in this budget. All he talks about is the deficit. But what is it that he doesn't agree with? The increased NATO spending, the increased defense spending, you know, the transfers for hospital infrastructure and investment. It's hard to see where the Conservatives are detracting from this assessment. And even, I think it was maybe a month ago, Kevin Page said that the current PBO's assessment, or the current PBO's language around the fiscal situation in Canada, is inflammatory and doesn't align with their nonpartisan role. So I think there's a lot to be said about where the PBO is coming out, but I don't think it's going to affect this government, you know, on the 17th, and I don't think it's going to affect the government going forward.
Melanie, what do you think about the effect on the government, but also what Sabrina said there, that in essence you have the Conservatives who sort of have a big banner headline saying that, you know, this big credit card budget, but not really sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of it. It's saying exactly what the problems are with the budget, because there are a number of things that ostensibly they would support.
Well, so the big problem here is Justin Trudeau used to say that, well, that one time he said the budget will balance itself, and we never let him live it down. But Mark Carney, what he's doing instead is saying, you're just never going to figure out if it's balanced or not, because they've made it so complicated that the PBOs had to come out and say, like, basically this is creative accounting, and they've expanded the definition of what is a capital investment so broadly that it doesn't meet international standards at all. And they're really burying operating costs, program costs, under the capital category, which, again, like, makes it impossible to determine whether it is actually going to be balanced. And so the PBO is saying that, like, based on our definition, it's not going to be balanced, that the commitment that Carney made, that many Canadians voted for thinking they were going to get change from Justin Trudeau, they put their faith in Carney because of his fiscal background, and instead they're not going to get the balanced budget that they were promised. And in fact, the PBO was essentially saying that what's set out in this budget barely meets the minimum standard for long-term sustainability. There's actually less fiscal room now. There's weaker resilience within the Canadian economy than the final 3 years of the Trudeau government. And that none of that is what Canadians voted for with what they thought they were going to get with Mark Carney. And so I think Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have a really great opportunity to keep pointing that out.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Carl, because timing is everything. This comes out, you know, just before the weekend, where we're going to have the vote in the House of Commons. We know how some people will vote. What do you think this does to anybody who may have been on the fence, specifically in the benches of the NDP?
I don't think it changes anything, because I think that come budget day, people already knew that this was creative accounting. I mean, and what the parliamentary budget officer did today kind of reminded me of some of my golf buddies who somehow always managed to turn triple bogeys into the par on the scorecard and make it sound legit somehow. And so, you know, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, what will matter, though, is how Canadians Canadians reacted to this budget. And by and large, they're fairly positive about the budget. And when you mentioned the NDP, I was, struck by the figure that 90% of NDP voters, or likely NDP voters, support the local infrastructure spending. So is there a path here to convince voters that bringing down the government over this budget is a good idea for New Democrats? That's the thinking that's being done right now by the 7 NDP MPs.
Yeah, and honestly, Carl, I can't help but think that the way you made people laugh on this panel is a really good indication of how all of us golf. Anybody who does golf on this panel, the whole take 6 strokes, call out 5, mark down 4. Sabrina, not that I know any of that, of course. How do you think that this plays, to Carl's point, it might already be baked in terms of the vote, but do you think that this is that sort of moment of pause before it, or do you think that this won't influence it whatsoever? And maybe speak more precisely about the stakes of Monday's vote going into this now.
I mean, I do think the stakes are really high, but I don't think that the Liberals are setting themselves up for an election. I don't think they want an election. And I certainly don't think really that the mood of the Canadian electorate or even the House of Commons is set to go to an election. So I think there is going to be some creative accounting perhaps in the House of Commons with attendance or not on voting through this budget. I do agree with Mel. I think that the Conservatives are going to continue to press on it, but I think that they don't have a leg to stand on because they aren't bringing anything else to the table. And so I don't know that I think that the PBO piece of this is really going to affect Mark Carney in any substantial way. I'll note that Canada's credit rating is still very good. It's better than the United States at this point. And I think that those kinds of fiscal pieces matter, and I think it matters that this budget sets Canada up well to continue on those domestic investment pieces that Mark Carney did set out to achieve. And just on the piece of the deficit and where that's going, I know it is a more complicated way of addressing the deficit, but I do think that the important part of where the budget is going is that it doesn't want to pay for, regular ticket items through deficit spending, and I think that's coming through this budget, and I think it'll come through the next couple of years.